Hello, welcome to Exercise 2 of Essential Skills in Modeling, Rendering, and Animation. I'm your author, Nicholas Bernhard Zeman, and I'm going to put together this little tutorial for you in learning a little bit about polygons and polygonal-based modeling. So we're going to learn a few simple tools. So if you're following from Exercise 1, the first thing we did was create a simple staircase using a polygon primitive cube and some pivot point offsets. We learned a little bit about manipulating things in 3D space. Alright, so what we're going to do today is create the same staircase in a little bit simpler but more efficient way. And we're going to learn a little bit about polygons. So what I'm going to do here first is teach you how to use the Create Polygon tool. And we're just going to do the first simple sample by going up to make sure that we're in our polygons menu here. And I'm going to go to Mesh and Create Polygon Tool. Now this is a tool, and in Maya a tool requires you to put some input in from the screen before it is complete. So I'm going to click on Create Polygon Tool. If I open the option box here, you'll see that the options for my tool open up in my tool settings on the left hand of the screen. And it's got a few settings here. We're going to leave them in their default state. And now every time I click my left mouse button here, it's going to create a vertex. So here's my first vertex, which will be vertex 0. It's creating it in an array if you know something about coding and the way programming works. Vertex 1, and it connects vertex 0 to vertex 1. And here's vertex 2. And now if I hit enter to complete the tool, boom, I have a polygon. Now this is, if you read through the text, the simplest type of polygon, which is a triangle. And a triangle consists of 3 sides. The reason that all things in 3D are broken into triangles is because a triangle is planar. It means that it cannot have more than one plane. It must be 2D in a way. So all of these points here, which are called the vertices, and I'm going to right click here and select vertex from my marking menu. And now that I selected my sub-object here, it has its own transform matrix. So this vertex has its own set of translations, which are being offset from our world origin. And no matter where I move this in any coordinate or any plane axis, it will still be two-dimensional on one side, or in one plane. So it will always be two-dimensional. So really 3D is calculated in 2D. So the world coordinate space is in 3 dimensions. Everything else, ultimately speaking, is broken down into 2-dimensional space. Okay, so we go back to our object. I'm just going to delete this. So now let's go back to creating polygons. I'm going to go back to my Create Polygon tool. And what happens when you click on this, it always puts points onto the grid somewhere. So whatever grid it is where you're creating these, it will just put a point wherever you click on the grid. And you can see as many points as I create, it will then connect them all and create as many sides to this polygon. And remember, everything is really a triangle. So if I go to my attribute editor, and under my shape node, under my mesh component display, let's see here, display triangles, and boom. You can see that even though it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, it's really consisting of triangles. So anyway, let's just delete that. Now, while creating, I'm going to go back to my Y is my shortcut for a previous tool, and once I use my X key, which I'm holding down, which is my grid snap, it will actually snap these points to grid spots. And I'll hit enter. And so when we create our polygon, we can snap those vertices anywhere we want. And we can also snap the vertices we are creating to other vertices. Okay, so now what we want to do, if you remember from video exercise 1, we created a staircase out of some cubes. It was very easy. We just snapped one cube onto another one based on a point of reference on the lower left-hand corner. of each cube. Now what we're going to do is create a similar staircase, except we're going to do it with a single polygon. So when doing this, we want to line our polygons up. We want to use that create polygon tool by snapping to the grid. We can do it on this grid. This is our perspective grid. But because our staircase is really going to be in depth going up on the Y, we want to do this in an orthographic view. So I'm going to go to my 4-panel view here, where I get my top and my side. It's kind of hard to see here, but that's the front, and here is the side. And we really want to do this in the side view. We don't want to do it in perspective view because we want to build up our polygon here. And I'm just going to scoot these over so we can see better. And one nice thing about Maya is the interface is vastly configurable, very customizable. Okay, so we want to work in this, and you can kind of see it all happening at once. So what I'm going to do is go to my Mesh Create Polygon tool, and using my snapping, I'm going to snap here in the X. So I'm going to create a staircase, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see this. And I'm going to go by 2s, 2, 2, 2, and I'm using my snap key here. And it's just easier to go by 2s. And you can see, as I'm snapping these, it's creating the polygon. And let's just snap down here. And now it will always take this last vertex that you create and the first vertex you create and connect them. So I'm going to hit enter. And now I have created, and you can see this happening. We really can't see it well on the top because there's no depth in this plane. And we really can't see it from the side because there's no depth in that plane. But we can see in our perspective view, right? So here's our side view, and here's our perspective view, what we have created. Now I realize this isn't the best staircase in the universe, but it's always configurable, and we can always take our vertices. So I'm going to Vertex Mode, right-clicking, and choosing to move my vertices. And generally speaking, in modeling, we tend to adjust the vertices. And now I'm going to use my snap key here, and I can always adjust any aspect of my model simply by moving all of my vertices. And I'm using the snap tool, and you notice they're retaining their component spacing. So we can always adjust this. You know, when you start using the create polygon tool, you know that you can adjust them later. But if you want it to be exact every 3, you have to work on making sure that you have 3 between each of these. And I'd have to count these out. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now we have a staircase. We've just expanded this, and I'm doing it fairly quickly. And once you get used to working with Maya, I generally consider it kind of like driving a stick shift. If there's anyone out there remembers stick shift cars, driving a stick shift took a little while to get the hang of the clutch and the gear shift, but after a while it just became second nature. So using Maya is a lot like driving a stick shift car. You just get acclimated to all the actions between your left and right hand and the keyboard shortcuts and things and the snaps, and after a while it just becomes second nature. Alright, so here's our staircase. Now I'm going to go back to our object mode. Now, object mode simply means when I select something, it selects the entire object, not the sub-objects that I can select here from my marking menu or from using some of my hotkeys. F8 goes from object mode to sub-object mode or vice versa because it's a toggle. F9 takes you directly to vertex selection. F10 allows you to select your edges. F11 selects the faces, and we only have one face now. And F12 actually selects UV points, which we're not going to get into in this tutorial. Alright, so we've got a staircase. It was a lot simpler than moving pivot points and putting cubes on top of cubes and then making sure they were all snapped into position. But now what we need to do is give it some depth. So it's pretty simple to give an object depth. Now I'm going to go back to our perspective view here. Sometimes this space, there we go. If you tap on the spacebar, it will maximize the view your mouse is over. I think it's lagging a little bit because I've got my video recording software recording all of my actions on the screen here. Okay, so now here is our polygon. We want to make this a three-dimensional object, right? We want to give it depth. And for that, we're going to use this tool called Extrude. So let's go to Edit Mesh and click on Extrude. Now, Extrude is an action, not a tool. The Create Polygon is a tool, which means it requires action in the viewport to occur. The Extrude is an action, therefore it doesn't have tool settings. However, it does have what we call a manipulator here. And this manipulator has all kinds of features. We have this thickness, offset, and divisions, right? And then we have this actual translate manipulator where we can move the face. So what is really happening here, Extrude is a pretty complex thing. It's simple in its function, but understanding everything that it's doing and all of the options you have here. You know, we have this offset, which will scale the polygon. Thickness is kind of the same thing as moving that out, but it's slightly different. It's just back there. And then we can make as many divisions as we want. But what's really happening here is it's duplicating this face right on top of the face you select. So it creates a complete duplicate of your face. But it also, and as we expand this out, connects that duplicate face with faces and vertices and all of that stuff, all those sub-objects that comprise this face. It connects all of them, which creates what we call a shell. And you see, this is the shell part. So when you create an extrude, it basically takes a flat object and pulls it out, giving it depth, but also making sure that it connects all of those faces, or connects all of those edges together, which gives you a shell, which gives you a complete 3D object. So let's just move it out a little bit there. And now the divisions, we can choose to divide this as many times as we want. Why do you need these divisions? Well, you don't really need those divisions. And that's one of the things about 3D. You do everything with the least amount of geometry that you can. Now we have a 3D staircase created from that extrude. And it's very simple. I mean, the operations, if you're going quickly, we created the polygon outline, and then we hit extrude and pulled that extrude out. Boom, we have a staircase. Much, much faster than the way we did it with lining up our primitives and laying them on top of each other. It's a much more efficient way to work. And working with basic level polygons like this is really a matter of drawing out the shape and pulling out that shape into a 3D object shell. Now, one of the things we want to do here is we want to create a rounded off area. You see, everything in 3D is exact. And in the real world, you know, the stairs, they aren't, let's go to our object mode here. The stairs, when we create them, are not going to be perfectly sharp right angles at 90 degrees. And one of the things about doing stuff in 3D is that we want it to eventually look a little bit more realistic. And so for something really low poly like a game, this might be alright, but we want to create a rounded off corner in certain areas. We're walking upstairs, nothing in the real world is 100% 90 degrees. We can try and try, but they'll be rounded, and if they're not rounded when we create them, friction and forces of nature will erode these nice clean corners, and it'll end up being rounded. And the process of rounding off a sharp corner is called a bevel, and we can find this tool here. Edit Mesh and Bevel. Now, a bevel works only on edges. Alright, so we're going to select the edges we want to bevel. I'm going to right-click here and choose my edge. And I'm going to select this edge here. Now I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and let's click on Bevel. And I'm going to open up my option box. Now, when opening an action option box in Maya, you get all these options here that pop up, right? And so the most important thing here is our width. And segments is also important. So you'll see if I click on Apply, the width, now see what's going to happen here. I click on Apply, and now instead of having one edge, I have two edges here that are connected by a second edge. So really it's taken, let's undo that, one edge, and it has created four edges because it's rounded that off. Now, and I'm hitting Z and Shift Z, which is undo and redo, so we can see the difference. Now if I choose two segments and hit Apply, boom, it will actually round that off in two segments, and it will connect those segments with another edge. Now if I choose 3, which is more likely, 2 is kind of an odd number, or a difficult number to get right. 3, and this makes more sense. Now you can see how much more rounded it is. So the more segments you add, the more rounded off this area is. And it also creates this extra little edge here. And that's just part of the process. We can delete it and it would be just fine. And you can see the rounded area. Okay, so I'm going to undo all those operands. And now we're going to do multiple ones, multiple edges at once. So if I want to do all of these at the same time, the problem when we're doing this rounding or beveling of edges, a lot of times it's calculating the width of this based on the width of another edge you're trying to do. In this case, I don't think it would make a difference because we have these buffer edges. But when you want to do a lot of bevels and you want them all to be exactly the same width and distance, and you want them to be equilateral, or maybe not equilateral, but at least symmetrical to one another, you do all of the bevels at once. So we're just clicking here and hit apply, and now they will all be exactly the same. Exactly the same distance and everything. So if you want them all to be even, you select all the edges that you want to bevel, and you bevel them all at once. It's very important that you do that, especially with objects that are, and let's bring one up. I'm just going to create a cube here just to illustrate the beveling point. Now, if I want to bevel all of the edges, and let's just select all these edges here. Right? If I select each one of these and run a bevel, and I'm going to go segments to 1 so we can see how this changes. Now I'm going to do the same width, and I should get. Well, I actually didn't do exactly what I wanted because I was trying to show how when doing these around, you should get slightly different variations in the width. Point being, really, if I wanted to do this a little bit more efficiently, I would just select all these edges and hit apply. And you would get the same cut for each edge. It would be all equilateral. Now, what I was trying to show is that it doesn't always match from one to the other, that each one of these will be different if I did those independently. So you generally, as a rule, I'll just delete that, want to select every edge that you're going to bevel if you want all those bevels to be exactly the same. And you can see that with a few really simple, short, easy to use operands, you can just go back through this again. And I can delete all of this. Nice thing about Extrude is if they don't work out, you can just delete all the faces that were generated, and we go back to our original staircase. So we created a polygon using our Create Polygon tool in the shape of a staircase, which was really nice. We just outlined the layout or the shape with a few mouse clicks, right? And then, so we learned our Mesh Create Polygon tool. That's how we used, that's what we used to create this outline. Let's delete that. And then the next step was that we extruded it. So I went to Edit Mesh and Extrude, which turns this 2D plane into a 3D object with connections. Now you'll notice I did not delete, when I deleted all of the faces there, I did not delete those extra vertices that were created by the operand of the bevel. So I didn't zoom in here close enough to see that we also have these extra vertices which created those bevels. So when I extrude it now, it still retains those bevels, which was going to be the third thing that I went through, what we did, which is select each one of those faces Now I'm going to back up here and select my extrude just so I can bring back the manipulator. So just to go back again, we created the outline of the stairway with some simple 90-degree angle clicks of our mouse, and then we extruded it to turn it into a 3D object. And then the next step was to select each one of these edges, which were 90-degree flat edges that looked like this, and we went to our Edit Mesh bevel tool. So what have you learned in this particular lesson? You've learned how to use the Create Polygon tool to outline shapes. You've learned how to use the Extrude tool to extrude the face to make the shape 3D with a shell, and you've learned how to round out a sharp edge into a curved edge using the bevel. Alright, so thank you for listening, and stay tuned for exercise 3.